Can everybody hear me? Okay. Good morning. This is Amy Miller, State NFIP Coordinator. Today we're going to be talking about H&H Study Overview, Floodway Encroachments. It's been a hot topic here in the state of Tennessee for the last almost 2 years. We started an initiative to start reviewing floodway encroachments or any kind of development along a stream, whether it's Zone A, Zone AE without a floodway or an unmapped stream. So we're going to kind of go over today some of the regulations and different things. So we're going to be talking about key NFIP regulations. What do the regulations actually say? What does FEMA have in the 44 Code of Federal Regulations? We're also going to talk about different study types and what the community and the engineer's responsibilities are, and as well as the review process and the requirements that are needed every time that we've had a study done. And I'd also like to state that there's going to be 2 additional presenters today. It's going to be Michael Taylor from AECOM and our contractual reviewer here for the state, Yang Jung from AECOM. So they'll probably be jumping in from time to time just to add a little sparkle to the presentation. And then Yang will kind of be taking over a little bit to talk about what he does for the actual review process. So we're going to go through this today. We have done this presentation one other time for the city of Knoxville. We had a good response from it, and we felt that this would be a great presentation for everyone here in the state to kind of get more information. So hope everyone had a happy Thanksgiving, got to see family or on a call or in person, and hope everybody's doing well. We wanted to try to do webinars monthly just to keep some of this material fresh in everyone's mind and be able to just have an opportunity to get together, which is a good thing. Okay. So what makes up a floodplain? As you can see from this schematic, you can see the stream at the very bottom center of this diagram where you can have the rushing water. And then as they kind of look at this area and consider where if they hypothetically put in fill into the flood fringe area and they have a 1-foot surcharge, the crosshatch area on a map that you see in your community flood insurance rate maps, or if you look at the digital flood insurance rate maps, or if you look at a national flood hazard layer, or if you look at the Tennessee property viewer, you can see the crosshatch area. And then beyond that is a flood fringe, and the whole thing encompasses the 100-year floodplain or the base flood. So that just kind of is a schematic here that you can see what makes up a floodplain. And then when we think about NFIP definitions, the base flood is a 1% annual chance flood event. Every year, a community has a 1% annual chance of having a flood event. So a lot of times FEMA, when they did their maps way back when, they would use terminology to say that, you know, that they were trying to protect against a 100-year flood. Or if you lived in Nashville or if you're in Tennessee in May 2010, a lot of people in their head think, well, if I live through the 1,000-year flood that happened in early May, then I'm fine. It's never going to happen again in my lifetime or my children or my grandchildren or my great-great-grandchildren. But that's not necessarily the case. So FEMA has started to use the 1% annual chance flood event for terminology. Say you have a 1% chance. So you can think of it as having a bag of marbles and you have 99 blue and you have 1 red. And if you stick your hand in the bag every year, it'll determine your annual chance flood event. Then another term that FEMA uses primarily is the BFE, the base flood elevation. When you have detailed maps, it actually shows on there, you'll have a rounded base flood elevation. There's a flood insurance study. Whenever communities voluntarily participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, once they become a participant, they receive flood insurance rate maps, and they also receive a flood insurance study. So flood insurance studies are really valuable tools. You can look at a community's flood risk. It identifies historical flood events. It identifies how the engineering study was done, the hydraulics and hydrology. It has flood data on there. If you look at the different cross sections of a stream, the width of the floodway, it'll show the base flood elevation with and without a floodway. And then there's also the flood insurance study profiles that if you're building a structure in a zone AE, a surveyor can use the upstream corner of the structure, measure perpendicular to the stream center line, and determine the base flood elevation to 1/10 of a foot. So that flood insurance guide, if a surveyor is using, should be using it for finished construction elevation certificates, and an engineer should also be using it for doing H&H study review. So that can kind of tell us when we're looking at the different models, did they use the correct HEC-RAS model? Does the cross sections and the widths and different things match up in the documentation? And sometimes we've been able to look at things and figure out pretty quickly that maybe the right HEC-RAS model was not used. The other NFIP definition that we're going to be talking about today, if you think about it, a lot of you guys are parents. So when you think about your children, a lot of times kids should ask for permission when they're trying to do something, right? Permission is a whole lot easier sometimes than forgiveness. So when you think about a conditional letter of map revision, if there's any kind of changes in the floodway width, the base flood elevation, or the base flood discharge, or even if there's changes within the models that the effective model that an engineer gets, and if he tries to duplicate it, he or she tries to duplicate it on their computer, if it doesn't come up to be identical, then there's changes in the model, and so they have to submit a conditional letter of map revision to FEMA to say there's changes in the model. Also, if they do a whole complete study and there's changes within any of those models, let's say between the existing, what's there on the ground versus what I'm proposing to do, if there's any kind of changes based upon what zone and what type of study it is, they have to submit a conditional letter of map revision to FEMA to get permission to build, whether it's a bridge, whether it's a trail, whether it's a structure. There's different kind of things that people can do in a floodway area. If they're trying to do something that changes the model, they have to submit that to FEMA to make sure that there's not more than a 1 foot surcharge, because if there's any insurable structures within that project reach that the surcharge is more than a foot, FEMA can deny that. So FEMA wants to look at this to make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and that all the various elements that we're going to get into today are done. And then once a project that has changes in the model is completed, then I'm also going to submit that to say that what I stated to do is a letter of map revision, but what I said that I proposed to do, I actually did, and then the flood insurance rate map and the flood insurance study are going to be updated to reflect that new base flood elevation, floodway widths, or base flood discharges, so that if, let's say my twin sister lived right beside me and she was going to develop later, if she wanted to, if she looked at the current maps, it may have outdated information, but if there is a letter of map revision, she has more detailed, more current information that she can use to make sure that she can reduce her flood risk by elevating her structure and different things like that. And then the special flood hazard areas, we had that schematic a moment ago about what makes up a floodplain. Whatever the floodway and the flood fringe make up a special flood hazard area, FEMA uses these terms interchangeably. So when we're talking about this today, we're talking about development that's within a floodplain, but more specifically, areas that are in the floodway or zone A streams or unmapped streams. So that's kind of some of the terms we're going to be using today. If some of you are sitting here today and you don't necessarily understand what some of these mean, we did have an NFIP 101 webinar for floodplain administrators. So if you feel like some of this is over your head and you want to get more information, just let us know. We can always set up another webinar and go through that again. So we're going to continue on. So when we think about the special flood hazard areas, these are areas that are inundated by floodwaters of the base flood. Every community that voluntarily participates in the National Flood Insurance Program have to adopt and enforce these requirements where the mandatory purchase of flood insurance applies. So whenever you look at your flood insurance rate map, sometimes when folks are trying to print out a flood insurance rate map, it's called a fermet for their specific property. When you look at a flood insurance rate map, there's different flood insurance risk zones. And each of these risk zones, whether it's A, AE, AH, AO, They have different kind of meanings and they have different kind of standards. So you can see from this chart here that Zone A or approximate methods. So they're going to tell you, you'll just kind of see a gray blob on a map. It'll say you have floodplain in this area, but there's no base flood elevations. There's no flood depth shown. It's just going to have an area where there's floodplain, where an area is susceptible to flooding. It can be inundated, but you don't have any kind of additional information. So that can make it hard as a floodplain administrator trying to help folks develop, because the structure or area has to be elevated 3 feet above the highest adjacent grade. So that can be problematic if you're in a rural community. When FEMA are doing revising flood insurance rate maps, whether they're doing community-wide, county-wide, or watershed-specific areas, they have different metrics to determine what level of method is going to be done, whether it's approximate or detailed. And it also has to do with population growth. So if you're in an area where it's very rural or you have a small community, you may not necessarily have detailed information. I'm going to give a shout out because I love you guys. Giles County, they're an unincorporated area and they have a lot of Zone A. And so it makes it hard from a floodplain administrator standpoint to try to enforce those regulations and try to help folks. And also is difficult for flood insurance agents to rate the policies. So sometimes communities can get on the list to have FEMA when there's extra money that's left over. Sometimes we're able to do some studies, whether it's a physical map revision, a PMR, or do a watershed study for areas. So FEMA is starting to look at watersheds to try to encapsulate the whole area and not just stop at a corp limit or a county boundary. The next risk zone is Zone AE, where you look at detailed methods. FEMA has base flood elevations on there. They have cross sections. They have the floodway delineated. If you look at Metro Nashville's, Davidson County's maps, they have a lot of Zone AE just due to having the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA do mapping revisions. So eventually the county will have 100% Zone AE. And when you're a floodplain administrator, that's kind of the creme de la creme that we all dream of and wish for, that we had those detailed methods with all that information. The other two are in different parts of the state. Zone AH is shallow flooding that has ponding. It can have flood depths with BFEs on the flood insurance rate maps due to detailed methods. And then Zone AO is shallow flooding. It can have a sheet flow where it has 1 to 3 depths with detailed methods designated with a 1, 2 to 3 foot depth. So you can have those on your flood insurance rate maps. If you've never ever sat down and looked at what type of zones you have in your community, I would encourage you to look at your paper flood insurance rate maps, or get online and look at the National Flood Hazard Layer FEMA Map Service Center website. Or if you're looking for property specific information, you can go on the Tennessee Property Viewer and look up a specific parcel and then click on Show FEMA Flood Layer, and it'll show you where the floodplain is located in your community or for a specific site. So as we talked about earlier, what makes up a special flood hazard area, as we've shown the schematics before, this is a little bit different this time, because when you're looking at the limit of a floodplain for an unencroached base flood area, you see the whole floodplain area. And then if you look between line A and B, is a flood elevation before the encroachment. So that bottom dotted line shows what the flood elevation is before there's any kind of encroachment, whether it be fill or a bridge or a structure. But when FEMA is revising flood insurance rate maps, they hypothetically bring in that fill as encroachment, and then that flood elevation the surcharge can go up to 1 foot. And then they also delineate the stream channel, and they show the flood elevation confined within the floodway. So when you're looking at a flood insurance study profile, when you're looking at the floodway data table, let's say that you're looking at Caterpillar Creek. When you're looking at that one, it does have cross sections, and it has base flood elevation information. And if I'm an engineer, it has an elevation with the floodway and without the floodway. So it's kind of taking this schematic here and breaking it down into information within the flood insurance study floodway data table to show that. And then line C minus D is a flood elevation after the encroachment. And the The NFIP has requirements that the surcharge is not to exceed more than 1 foot. Or some other communities, I believe it's Indiana or Illinois, has a 0.00 surcharge that no floodway encroachments can have any kind of rise whatsoever. So it depends upon what state and what the requirements are going to be. So talk about types of floodplain studies. Detailed studies, Zone AE, will show the special flood hazard area, and it'll also show the 500-year floodplain. So that would be the shaded zone X that are defined, and the BFEs are published. So when you're looking at a flood insurance study profile, you'll see that they have 4 different kind of lines, and then you'll see the bottom of the stream on there. You'll see the 10-year, 50-year, 100-year, and 500-year. So when they have 10, 2%, 1%, and 0.2% annual chance flood discharges, it also can be the 10, 50, 100, and 500 year that are estimated. And the profiles are provided in the flood insurance study. If you don't have it in your community, if you've never ever seen it, go on the MAP Service Center website, type in your community information, and when you look under effective products, you'll see FIS. So click on that and it'll have your flood insurance study available. There's some communities that may have more than one document, so you may have volume 1, 2, 3, and 4. Make sure that you have that in your community file. Make sure that if you're just a one-person shop or there's multiple people in your department that's working on floodplain management, make sure that they all have a copy of it. They know where it's at, and saving it as a PDF on your computer is pretty easy. It also has structure, geometry from detailed field surveys. So if I have a bridge, it'll show on the flood insurance study profile, the bottom of the bridge and that elevation and the top. Sometimes it has street intersections and different things in there. And a floodway analysis is typically performed for these. For a limited detailed study, the special flood hazard area is defined and it may have base flood elevations. The profiles and the base flood elevations can be published in the flood insurance study. The study parameters may vary based upon available data and budget. So sometimes you can't have a limited detailed study. I know that Wilson County and Rutherford County have a limited detailed study, and they have that information. So they have the FIS study, but they also have some different information that folks can use that's not published in their flood insurance study. And then approximate study, Zone A, the special flood hazard area is defined, but it doesn't have any BFE or flood profiles. So the next slide that we have just has a visual in case you've never ever seen these before. But every voluntary community that participates in the National Flood Insurance Program has to adopt the statewide model ordinance. And so when communities adopt the ordinance, there are standards for floodways that they have to regulate development to ensure that flood hazards are not increased on other properties. So a lot of times when we've been trying to help communities and doing reviews, there's always the argument by the developer, by the engineer, that I only want to look at site-specific information, but the National Flood Insurance Program requires that and the standard states that it can't increase anywhere on other communities or anywhere in the community. So you have to look beyond just the project site and tie into other cross sections or create cross sections to look at it comprehensively and holistically. Now, communities without floodways, so if I have a Zone A, they must have a hydraulic model created to ensure that flood hazard discharges aren't above the 1 foot surcharge. This makes it a little bit harder because sometimes there isn't a HEC-RAS model available, so the developer or the engineer would have to hire a surveyor to go out and survey the area, delineate where the floodway is going to be, create cross sections, and it can kind of be a little bit more cumbersome to do. But again, the standard is that they can't have any kind of surcharge above 1 foot. So those are kind of the two standards. And then when we look at the, what does the Code of Federal Regulations say? So the Code of Federal Regulations is kind of like the Bible for floodplain management. It has definitions as far as what's a structure, what's a floodway, different things like that. So a regulatory floodway means the channel of a river or other water course and the adjacent land areas that must be reserved in order to discharge the base flood without cumulatively increasing the water surface elevation more than a designated height. So the example that I try to use when I talk to folks on the phone is that if you imagine having a bathtub and you turn on, let's say your child turns on the faucet and starts running it. And let's say they get busy and they go do something else. So that water is going to rise within the bathtub. And then if you forget about it, that water is going to go up over the bathtub and it's going to go onto the bathroom floor and it's going to make a huge mess. And the same sort of thing can be thought of for a regulatory floodway. You have a stream in your community and you want to make sure that that area of the stream can rise, but you also want to make sure that the area is right adjacent to that floodway or stream are free of any kind of encroachments, any kind of obstruction, so that that base flood can rise and come over bank, right? So the stream channel and the portion of the adjacent floodplain should be remain open to permit the passage of the base flood. The floodway is a regulatory measure to assist communities with protecting the river corridor where flows are most sensitive to encroachment. So again, a lot of times we think about the development of the United States when folks first came here. They typically settled along streams and rivers for commerce, for industry, or because it was pretty. And today you have individuals that want to live near a river, a stream, for solitude, for fishing, for recreation, different things like that. So again, you want to make sure that when there's development along those areas, that it's not going to negatively affect other property owners and is not going to exacerbate or increase flooding in a community. All right, so then this is just another picture of a floodway. Kind of went over this already, so I think we'll just go ahead and skip ahead. But there's that. So we're talking about performing a floodway encroachment analysis. I've been in this position 6.5 years. And when I first started doing community assistance visits, or what I affectionately call audits, a lot of times there would be floodway development. And when we're talking about having, performing a hydraulic and hydrologic analysis, didn't really see that when I was going out to communities. You'd have a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that would say it is assumed to be a no rise, or other things that were not necessarily comprehensive and really met the standards. But 44 Code of Federal Regulation in section 60.3 D3 states that a community should prohibit encroachments, including fill, new construction, substantial improvements, or other development within an adopted regulatory floodway, unless it has been demonstrated through hydraulic analysis performed in accordance with standard engineering practice, that the proposed encroachment would not result in any increase in flood levels within the community during the occurrence of the base flood discharge. So this is kind of the standard. This has been on the books since 1968. Since we started doing in-house reviews, everybody says, well, when did this occur? But it's always been on the books. So a lot of communities, when there's floodway development that's occurring in their community, if I'm not an engineer and I'm supposed to look at this and figure out that an engineer did an H&H study and analysis correctly, that's an unfunded mandate. So when we went out and did community assistance visits, this was an issue. And now that the state of Tennessee has Amy Hansen is our FEMA Region 4 rep, I affectionately call her the violation queen. One of the biggest violations that we have here in the state is that there was fill that was being placed in the floodway. So we wanted to try to do something to try to eliminate some of the potential violations that were occurring, because when a potential violation is occurring in a community, the mayor gets a letter, the developer gets a letter, and the engineer gets a letter, as well as a floodplain administrator and myself. So we're trying to slow down some of these violation letters and trying to make sure that development is following these regulations, which are important. Now, this is typically this section 60.3 D3 is for zone AE with floodways. So you go, okay, Amy, what do I do if I have a zone AE without a floodway, a zone A, or unmapped stream? Good question. So the next section of the Code of Federal Regulations talks about require until a regulatory floodway is designated, construction or other shall be A 1 through 30 and AE on the community's firm unless it has been demonstrated that the cumulative effect of the proposed development, when combined with all other existing and anticipated development, will not increase the water surface elevation of the base flood more than 1 foot at any point within the community. So this kind of goes with talking about Zone AE without a floodway, Zone A, and unmapped streams. So whether I'm a private individual doing development, whether I'm a community, whether I'm a public utility, public works, no matter who it is, if there's any kind of development that's going, is being developed along a stream or in a floodway, there has to be an engineering analysis to make sure that the increase in the water surface elevation of the base flood is not more than a foot anywhere within the community. So again, it's not just properties, it's not just site specific, but it's anywhere within the community. So it has to be, there has to be tie-ins going upstream and downstream to make sure that it's not causing harm to others. So within the statewide model ordinance, there are requirements for the different zones and the different types. We're just going to kind of go through some of these. It is in every single community's ordinance. So if you're a floodplain administrator and when someone is coming in to do development, you want to make sure that you look at the site to see if it's in the floodplain, floodway, or if there is a stream on the property that maybe you didn't see on the map. It's always important to do inspections and go out and walk the sites to make sure that you're looking at floodplain management. Sometimes I hear people say, well, I thought TDEC will take care of that. TDEC does not take care of floodplain regulations. That is up to a local community. So you want to make sure that you do inspections to make sure that everything is fine. And some people may not take this as seriously as they should, but I become the angry citizen hotline. And whenever there's development that's occurring along a stream, I tend to get probably weekly calls from citizens upset saying, is my neighbor following the rules? Have they submitted anything? And so we want to make sure that people are being compliant, because with COVID and everything that's going on, a lot of people are home and they have more time on their hands than they've ever had, and they're watching what's going on in the community. So you want to make sure that you're being proactive, making sure that you're following the standards, because if you're not, I'll probably hear about it. And I've been hearing about it from a lot of places. So you want to make sure that you do things correctly and that things are done well. So standards for the special flood hazard area with base flood elevations and with floodways designated, as we talked about earlier, encroachments are prohibited, including fill, new construction, substantial improvements, or other development within the adopted regulatory floodway. There has to be an H&H analysis performed with standard engineering practice, and the encroachment shall not result in any increase in flood levels or floodway widths during a base flood discharge. So what I did in the Tennessee no-rise guidance document was I tried to have bullet points and try to spell it out as clearly as possible. But really what should be achieved is a 0.00 or a no rise. If it's outside the floodway and it's in the floodway fringe, then you don't have to do an engineering analysis, but you want to make sure that you keep that fill in the flood fringe and not in the floodway. Because the biggest thing that we're having a problem with is that people will do a letter map revision based upon fill, and they say it's outside the floodway, but maybe the surveyor doesn't stake it out correctly, or maybe the person that's bringing in the fill, maybe they knocked down a couple stakes. I don't know, but we've been having problems where people have been kind of pushing that fill into the floodway. So you can do it in the flood fringe, but you want to make sure that you have a nice buffer so that it doesn't go into the floodway. Because if you submit that letter of map revision based upon fill to FEMA and then it goes over into the floodway, then that triggers a potential violation, and then the FEMA will require the applicant to do an engineering analysis. And then that opens up a whole bunch of, if you think you're just doing a simple letter map revision based upon fill, and then you get told, oh, hey, you got to do an engineering analysis and you got to pay tens of thousands of dollars to fix a boo-boo, that's not good. So again, you want to make sure that when you're having a site plan, if you're a floodplain administrator, that the surveyor uses a national flood hazard layer to delineate the floodplain versus a floodway, and then go out and actually check when they're working at the site to make sure that that fill isn't going over into the floodway if they don't want it to. So that's a good question, Michael. Thank you. Now, I will also say that we've had 75 submittals of H&H studies to review. And so every year I ask Santa for a no rise, or when my birthday hits about the middle of the year, I ask, like, hey, can I have a no rise? And I haven't gotten it yet. So we haven't had a project submitted yet that has achieved a no rise. So it is very difficult. So I always try to tell engineers, don't overpromise and underdeliver, to make sure that when you're talking to a client that you budget in time for a conditional letter map revision, that you have the fee, like I think it's starting at $6,500 or $8,000. And then if you do a conditional letter map revision, you also have to follow it up with a letter map revision. So make sure that you budget in that time to be able to submit to FEMA to get it approved, because so many times Young and I have calls with folks and they didn't budget in for that, or they didn't budget in the time, or they didn't budget in the money. And that's not something that we can fix. We're just here to give technical assistance. So you just want to make sure, if you're a floodplain administrator, when you're talking to folks or you give them that no rise guidance document, just to make sure to say, hey, make sure that they budget in, because things can happen and not everything comes magical in life. Sometimes you have hiccups and bumps. So you want to make sure that people budget and allocate time and money for that if it happens. So if there are any kind of changes in the base flood elevation, floodway width, or base flood discharge, so if an engineer starts to do the hydraulic modeling, if there's any kind of increase in the base flood elevation, change in the floodway shape, change in the hydrology, provided that the applicant first applies for a conditional letter of map revision and floodway revision, fulfills requirements for such revisions as established under provision in the Code of Federal Regulations 65.12, and receives the approval of FEMA. So if there are any kind of changes, people fuss and cuss and don't want to do it, but it is actually in the Code of Federal Regulations that if there are any kind of changes in the models, it has to be submitted as a conditional letter map revision. I had a call from an engineer last week and said, well, the community doesn't want to submit a clomer, doesn't want to submit a loamer. I said, well, the federal regulations require that you do. So it's not really up to us to say that you can't do it. It's a federal mandate, so it is something that has to be done. So this just kind of has more information here. This actually has the text. So again, you have to change flood insurance rate maps to reflect base flood elevations caused by proposed encroachments. Again, it also, the standard here under letter A talks about if there's any kind of cause of base flood elevation increase in excess of those permitted under 44 CFR 60.3 C10 or D3, the community shall apply to the Federal Insurance Administrator for conditional approval of such action prior to permitting the encroachments to occur, and shall submit as part of the application. So that's in there. That's not an Amy Miller standard. That is a FEMA standard. So again, when we tell people that you have to submit a conditional letter map revision, we're just following what the federal guidelines state. And then some of the engineer responsibilities for a no rise or MT2, they need to prove the case is a no rise through engineering analysis. A lot of the communities around the state, because this is an unfunded mandate, have had my office and have had Young review them for compliance. If the case is not a no rise case, then you submit the conditional letter map revision to FEMA. And once a conditional letter map revision is approved by FEMA, then a letter map revision. So again, I'm going to ask for permission first. And then once FEMA says, yes, Amy, you have permission, I'm going to go ahead and do the proposed development. And then within 6 months of completion, I'm going to submit a letter of map revision to show the as-built. So what I proposed that I was going to do, I actually did it. And then I'm going to submit it to FEMA to update the flood insurance rate map and the flood insurance study profile. If there's significant changes in the effective model in order to achieve a no-rise, then it could be an option to submit a letter of map revision to FEMA to correct those issues first, and then submit a no-rise case here for us to look at. So that's some of the information. Now, I know that some of this is probably super technical for some of you, and you're thinking, oh my. But if you have questions, Yang and I, a lot of times, if there's someone that has a development and an engineer isn't quite sure what he or she is supposed to do, we have had conference calls to kind of talk about how to tackle this beast, because let's face it, if you're sitting, okay, y'all know that I love football, right? And when I say Manning's equation, you're going to think of either Eli or Peyton and how they throw a touchdown, right? You're not going to be thinking about the Manning's equation and thinking about roughness coefficient when you're thinking about an engineer review. So some of this stuff you're never probably ever going to have in regular everyday conversation. And even if you're in your office and somebody asks you questions, it is very technical, and it is something that hasn't been enforced like it should here in the state historically. So I had extra money in the budget and just decided to help local communities. So at first it was met with enthusiasm, and then it has kind of shifted over time. But again, I'm the type of person that I believe in what I'm doing, and I believe in doing the right thing even when it's hard. So we're going to continue to do reviews. We're going to continue to provide technical assistance to communities regarding these standards. So we're talking about a zone AE with base flood elevations, but without floodways designated. There are some communities that have this within their flood insurance rate maps, but it's the same sort of standard again. Until a floodway is designated, no new construction, substantial improvements, or other development, including fill, shall be permitted within zone AE on the community's flood insurance rate map unless it's been demonstrated through an H&H analysis performed that the cumulative effect of the proposed development when combined with all other existing and anticipated development will not increase the water surface elevation of the base flood more than 1 foot at any point within the community. So again, just remember, it's not site specific, it's community wide. So it has to be a comprehensive approach. So
real quick, we've got an additional question here. Okay. Michael thought he had another question. What if you get a no rise in base flood elevation, but the floodway surcharge increases? For example, floodway surcharge increases from 0.8 inches to 0.9, but it's still less than the 1 inch. 1 foot. Those are foot, not inches. 1 foot maximum allowable increase.
Yang. Yeah.
All right, this is Yang. So if you look at the Tennessee No Rise certification form, it will say, like a no impact the 100-year flood elevations and floodway elevations and floodway width. So yes, if you have the surcharge increase, then that's not technically no rise.
Mike, can you help me out on this one?
Oh, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, because only Amy and I were talking, she doesn't have her speaker volume up. So yes, yeah, I can hear you.
Did you hear what I explained?
Yes, we did.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
All right.
Amy, I already explained, yes.
Okay, great. I couldn't hear a word, so I'm going to take your word on it.
All right.
It's okay. All right. So, where was I? Okay. So, the community and the engineer responsibility. The community may permit encroachments in zone AE on the community's firm that would result in an increase in the water surface elevation of the base flood. And any project that the water surface elevation increases more than a foot due to the proposed development, Again, it's going to require a conditional letter of map revision. So you are allowed to have a 1 foot surcharge, but if you go beyond that, or there's any other changes, you'll have to submit a conditional letter of map revision to fulfill the requirement for such revisions. So if there's any kind of changes, regardless of the zone, you will have to submit a conditional letter of map revision, engineer will. And then we're looking for standards for streams without a base flood elevation and floodways. No encroachments, including structures or fill material, shall be located within an area equal to the width of the stream, or 20 feet, whichever is greater, measured from the top of the stream bank. That's where, if you have a development that's occurring, you're going to want to have a site plan from a licensed surveyor and use the FEMA National Flood Hazard Layer to make sure that you delineate the stream, to make sure that it's actually the width and everything is correct, and that the surveyor will measure it from the top of the stream banks and see, is it 10 feet, is it 20 feet, is it 30 feet, whichever it is, and have that labeled on the site plan. And then the engineer will demonstrate the cumulative effect of the proposed development when combined with all other existing and anticipated development will not increase the water surface elevation of the base flood more than a foot at any point within the community. And the engineering certification should be supported by technical data that conforms to the standard hydraulic engineering principles. So again, there is a Tennessee no-rise guidance document, there's the MT2 document, and then there's some other FEMA engineering information. They have a whole guidance document on how to do an H&H study. So if you've never ever looked at it, or if you have an engineer that comes in, FEMA does have information available to help. And they do have some MT2 reviewers that you can ask questions. That's very helpful. So a community may permit it that would result, permit an encroachment in a zone A that would result in an increase in the water surface elevation. And then any projects that the water surface elevation increases more than a foot, use of the proposed development will require a conditional letter of map revision to fulfill the requirements of section 65.12. And it has to receive the approval of FEMA. That's one thing that I probably should have mentioned earlier, that just because someone submits a conditional letter of map revision, they have to have 90 days to review it. And if there's any kind of missing pieces and parts, FEMA kind of goes, and they stop the process and they say, okay, pump the brakes, we need additional information, or something is missing. We had a case in Tennessee where there was a potential violation. The engineer submitted documentation to FEMA, and they didn't ask for our help. I said, you understand what you're doing? They said, yeah. And we got back 3 pages, single space of everything they forgot to submit or omitted or whatever, or maybe didn't understand what to do. We had 3 pages. So they had 90 days to pretty much do the whole thing over again. So you want to make sure that when an engineer is doing this, that they have that Tennessee no-rise guidance document and ask questions if something is a little squirrely or a little unfamiliar, or a little bit fuzzy. It helps so much. Asking for help is a great thing. Standards for unmapped streams: no encroachments, including fill or other material or other development, including structures, shall be located within an area at least equal to twice the width of the stream measured from the top of each stream bank. So again, if you have any kind of unmapped stream on a site, you're going to want to look at the site plan. You're going to want to go out and inspect the site to see. I had a case in Middle Tennessee where someone was putting in a driveway culvert across the stream, and the only way I knew about it was they sent pictures. It wasn't in the application. The floodplain administrator does not go out and look at anything, and so I was able to talk to the applicant and work with him to get the engineering analysis that was needed. And again, the engineer is going to demonstrate the cumulative effect of the proposed development when combined with all other existing and anticipated development, and it's not going to increase the water surface elevation of the base flood more than a foot at any point within the municipality. So these are a little bit harder to do for an engineer, but a community may permit encroachments within the unmapped stream boundaries within the community that would result in an increase in the water surface elevation And then the community may update FEMA with a flood map using the engineering models to ask the engineer to submit a letter of map revision after the project completion. Because sometimes when an engineer does these analysis, they have more detailed information. So my unmapped stream could go, let's say, from a zone A to a zone AE. If they have enough information, they can submit that as a physical map revision, or the community can submit it to FEMA without a fee for new better technical data. So just keep that in mind when, or let's say you're doing a stream realignment project that has to be submitted to FEMA as a letter of map revision within 6 months of completion. So if you have new detailed information, the worst thing in the world is to sit on it and not share it. So make sure that you encourage the engineer to give you that information so that it can be submitted to update your flood insurance rate maps, because your citizens will thank you, your surveyors will thank you, your flood insurance agents will thank you if there's more detailed information, because then when you're looking at an elevation certificate, or if you just have general questions, it just makes life a whole bunch easier. It just does. I always like to have a little bit of fun when I do presentations. I like to have things in there that make me laugh. And so when we're looking at submittal requirements, you know, Santa is making a list this time of year to see who's naughty or nice. And I'm sure that I've been probably a little bit of both this year. But when you're making a list, or when you're looking for an engineering analysis, there are certain things that should be submitted. Now, the one thing that I have always wanted, other than a no-rise, is to have a completed submittal package. So within the Tennessee no-rise guidance document, it actually has listed all the things that are required. And unfortunately, some people don't necessarily submit everything that we need to do a review quickly. And so I'm sure that Yang sometimes, when he reviews some of these packages, probably feels a little bit of frustration. But the one thing is, if we need all the electronic hydraulic models, they need to be labeled in a file folder so that we know what's what. And we're going to get into what the electronic hydraulic models look like here in a little bit. And then there's a little way that I kind of explain it to people that are non-engineers, so that everybody giggles, but it's a way to kind of remember it. And then having a project narrative. So a lot of times when there's various projects throughout the state that are going on, we want to make sure that there's a project narrative to tell us the who, what, where, when, why. So we want to know where it is. We want to know what's being proposed. Anybody should be able to pick up the engineering analysis and at least be able to read the project narrative to know where and what is being proposed. The next item is a topographic work map to show where the stream is located, if the floodway is delineated on there, if it's a zone AE, or if I'm an engineer and I have to hire a surveyor to delineate it and see the existing and proposed and the cross sections and the tie-ins, to make sure that everything that you can see how this proposed development is going to affect the area and how it ties into other sources of base flood information. Cross-section plots, as I talked about, property survey, proposed plans that have to be stamped and sealed by an engineer, and then if possible, a no-rise certification. Or if it's not, if it's in the zone AE, then is it going to achieve the 1 foot rise? So that's some of the submittal requirements. In 2021, we're going to be asking communities if they request our assistance, that we got to have a little help from our friends. So we're going to want to have the communities kind of help us with this a little bit to make sure that all the submittal package, all the elements are in there. Because a lot of times what happens is communities will just kind of punt to me and say, okay, Amy, you just deal with it. But due to the volume of work that I have and that Joseph has with me, helping me, we need to have the communities take a more active role in this to make sure that some of these elements, if you're asking us for help, then we need to make sure that we have all the pieces of the puzzle to review it and make sure that it's complete. So we are going to be instituting some new guidelines in the coming year about technical assistance and different things that we'll be talking about probably a little bit tomorrow in the webinar for the virtual conference. So For submittal requirements, organization is a beautiful thing. You want to make sure that when you're doing an engineering analysis, or if you're the local community and you receive it, that it's organized, that the hydraulic models are properly labeled, and then write a project narrative, again, so anyone can read it, can understand it. The topographic work map should show the vertical tie-ins, the floodplain, the floodway, and other natural features of the site. And then cross-section plots for the existing and proposed changes. And then a property surveyor should be done by a licensed Tennessee surveyor, if applicable, and then determine if a rise occurs or no rise happens. So those are some of the submittal requirements. The one thing that I think is probably the hardest, that's been kind of predominant, is a lot of submittals do not have a topographic work map. A lot of people don't want to do it. But again, if we're trying to see if there's vertical tie-ins and to see the floodplain and floodway, and make sure that all the models are lining up, there does have to be a topographic work map. And the other thing of having a stamp of the existing and proposed plans by an engineer, sometimes those are missing. Sometimes people forget to stamp, seal it, sign it. You know, it's kind of like that song, signed, sealed, delivered, I'm yours. So that's kind of what we want when people submit these packages. Hopefully y'all are laughing. I can't hear anything, but I'm sure somebody is. All right. So you guys will see here up at the upper right-hand corner, there's a little angel and it says Amy at the bottom. So these are some of the things that I pray for. These are some of the things that I would like to see. We were putting up the Christmas tree the day after Thanksgiving, and that's my favorite ornament. And so I was thinking about doing this presentation, and that these are some of the things that we would like to see when there are submittals and projects being done. We talked about, we kind of talked about most of these bullet points, but the thing that we're going to talk about next is hydraulic models and what they mean. There's 5 different ones, and the engineer will need to create an effective model that duplicates the results in the flood insurance study if one does not exist. So like if you have a zone AE without a floodway, you have a zone A, or you have an unmapped stream, they're going to have to try to create one, make sure that the models, and then the projects affecting streams modeled using limited detailed methods should meet the same criteria as detailed streams. So again, it's kind of like you got to talk apples to apples. You can't try to create something that isn't the same. You have to use the same methodology, the same standards, which is really important. So the next one, I love this slide because you guys will see at the bottom there, that's the pecan pie that I made for Thanksgiving. And so a lot of times when I talk to citizens and different individuals about floodway requirements, you have to be able to explain it in a way that people will understand. So I kind of came up with the pecan pie analogy, is that there's different elements and pieces that you need when you're making a pie, right? So you need the oven, you need a pie plate, you need a pie crust, you need the filling, and then you got to bake it, right? So one of my friends, Patrick McMahon, was talking to us, had a question before Thanksgiving, was asking about overtopping. And I sent an email and said, hey, I just baked a pecan pie, and guess what? It didn't overtop. So you can tell from this picture that it did not overtop. It come out perfectly, and it was delicious on Thanksgiving. But when you're looking at the different hydraulic modeling, the first one is the effective model that engineers will request from the FEMA engineering library. So that's kind of the godfather. That's kind of the model of how FEMA created the flood insurance rate maps. So everybody calls and tries to get Yang and I to give them the models, but FEMA is the gatekeeper for the engineering model. So it has to go through the FEMA engineering library, because again, you want to be apples to apples. And then the duplicate effective model is a model that the engineer will run on his or her computer. So it has to be identical. So if you have the effective model from FEMA, you put it on your computer and then you run it, it should duplicate it and be identical. The other thing that a lot of you guys probably won't understand if you're not an engineer, but if you receive a HEC2 model from FEMA, that's an older model that maybe sometimes comes out on dot matrix paper. And so either the engineer or an engineering intern or someone in the office who probably wants to pull their hair out or their eyes will bleed because they have to sit there and key in all that information. It takes a lot of time. So a lot of times engineers are not happy. They're not happy if they don't get anything, but they're still unhappy if they get a HEC 2 because it is very labor intensive to add all the information on the computer. The corrected effective model is non-man-made changes. So that can be, let's say that you have topography or you have topos on the HEC-RAS model that maybe are 20 feet apart. And what an engineer can do is input, let's see, Tennessee LiDAR information for an area. So that could be correcting errors in the model. So those would be non-man-made changes. So let's say that you want to put LiDAR in there, you'd have a corrected effective model. Existing condition model is all man-made changes. So what I like to use for an example is if it was a farm, let's say 20 years ago, and it became a 100-lot subdivision, you're going to have to go in there and show what's existing, any kind of man-made changes. So if there's roads, if there's bridges, if there's fill, if there's structures, any kind of man-made changes have to be incorporated into the existing conditions model. And then the proposed conditions model is based upon the proposed or design plan. So whatever I'm proposing to do, I'm going to input that into the proposed conditions model. The thing to remember about this is everything has to kind of come out the same. Everything has to be identical, right? And so if you have any kind of changes in the base flood elevation, the floodway widths, or the base flood discharge, if you have any kind of changes, it has to be submitted as a conditional letter of map revision if there's increases. So that's important to remember. And then ordering the effective model, FEMA has a form that an engineer would request or obtain, and then they would fill out the information requesting the hydraulic model for the zone A, AE, or AE with floodway from the FEMA engineering library. And then they complete the flood insurance data request form, and then they pay a fee and wait 6 to 8 weeks. One of my favorite things, sometimes it makes me giggle, is that sometimes folks will send it in on Monday and then call me on Tuesday afternoon and say, hey, how come I don't have it? It does take 6 to 8 weeks. So patience is something that's becoming an endangered species. So again, you got to be patient. And again, as we talked about earlier, budgeting time in to get some of these elements is important, and it does take time and it is slow. But if there's a model available, it will come from FEMA. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Yang. You guys can listen to him and Mike.
Quick, Amy.
Yeah.
There was one question from Maria. She was asking if there is a map or listing to show areas of proposed changes.
No, I mean, that's something that that's something that the engineer would have to do for the proposed changes. Because when you're looking at the proposed changes, you're going to get the hydraulic model from FEMA. And when you look at it, if let's say it doesn't show a subdivision, or then that's where they're going to have to go in for the existing and fix that. And then the proposed is what you're proposing to do on site. So like if you're building a trail, if you're building a structure or a bridge, then you're going to input that into the proposed. The proposed is whatever you're proposing to do at the site.
Sweet, sounds good. So I guess we are turning it over to Yang.
All right, good morning all. Thanks, Amy. As Amy introduced in the beginning of the presentation, ACOM is the study contractor for the NORISE review for state of Tennessee, and I'm the lead engineer perform the NORISE review. And can you go to the next slide?
I think I was going to click it.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. So Topographic Work Map. This is very important piece of data that we require for the NORISE review. And there's a certain things like a certificate requires. The picture on the right side is the like example that we have. for the Topographic Work Map. This is identical requirement if you submit the CLOMAR case or LOMAR case to the FEMA. And it should show the vertical datums, and your cross-section layout should be shown, and effective delineation has to be shown, and revised delineation has to be shown. Since you're only, interested in your project area, you should have the tie-in on the, upstream side and downstream side to the effective data. And stream centerline also has to shown, and, the topographic contour line has to be labels, and scale and north arrow need to be shown. A lot of times requesters ask why they need this topographic work map. They said it is no rise cases, there's no elevation increase, why they need to submit the, this particular data. So, I'll give you the answer in two ways. I have two examples. Let's say you have project that replaced the curvert that result elevation decrease upstreams. Those elevation decrease will lead the smaller floodplain boundary upstreams. So these topographic work map can capture those changes. And another example can be, for example, you have another project that doesn't have any changes in elevations. But, if you use the latest topo, it might give you the, different floodplain delineations, boundary delineation from the effective boundaries. And moreover, your model result, such as floodplain width, floodway width, can be checked against this map. That's why we require this piece of information for the no-rise review. Next slide. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, next one is the cross-section plot. So this is another thing. Since you guys are revising the HECRES model, we require for the requester to submit this existing and proposed cross-section plot for the project sites, and features, structures, and any changes should be labeled, and it has to be certified. And next slide. And some of you guys actually ask questions. So, the no rise basically means, there is no increase on any flood levels. So any profiles, basically 100-year for these cases. And, no rise emissions should not increase floodway elevations or the floodway width. Next slide. So project not requiring hydraulic analysis. I think permanent removal of the existing structure is not required, the H&H study. And, replacement of the structure within the same, no new vertical obstructions. But, if the structure is substantially damaged, then that's not applicable in these cases. So that's exceptions. And projects that do not increase existing grade, such as driveway, then you don't have to submit the H&H study. And small isolated obstructions, such as mailbox, post, a park bench or pole barn, those kind of stuff doesn't require to submit the H&H study. Next slide. Okay, so it's a continuation. Light duty fence that will likely collapse or not providing any obstruction during the flood event, then does not require H&H study. And development in conveyance shadow of the existing structure, that doesn't require the engineering study. And greenway trail placed at grade with a minimum clearing, that doesn't require H&H study. And maintenance of the existing use, such as bridges, right-of-way, and easements, those kind of stuff doesn't require H&H study. Next slide. So Amy explained all the study requirement based on the study type. So, I'll explain what I do normally when I receive the cases for the no-rise review and common problem that I see. So the when we receive the data, we normally check completeness of the submittals and check the project scope on the report and cross-check against the proposed plan or design plan or topographic work map, cross-section plots, and the models. And we also double check the model check, and all submittal model has to be executable, and like duplicate effective model reserve match with effective, and if there's any hydraulic model issues such as hydrology changes and drawdowns, floodway run exist, and surcharge issues, any major modeling errors such as overtoppings, and check no-rise certifications, and check PE license against the Tennessee license database and make sure the certification is valid. And depending on the review comment, we provide the comments or issue the approval letters. Next slide. So we have the checklist to check the completeness of the submittal package. So, Amy mentioned this several times, so I'm not going to go through, but if you look at the, the screen capture of the right side, it has the, the requirements. So we initially double check, whether we receive those data or not. And, for example, topographic work map, if there's a certification section is, has stamp, then we check this. So we fill out all this information. And next slide. So the common non-model related problems, a lot of times people submit the, documents, but they don't have the, certified stamps. So that need to be, provided. And, for example, topographic work maps, cross-section plot, design plan, those all have to be certified. And sometimes topographic work map, missing some of the proposed, the delineation, like a floodway. And a lot of times, the topographic work map doesn't even have the tie-in location with the existing, effective, special flood hazard area layers at the downstream and upstream limit. And, vertical datum, reference is also common missing items. And next slide. So when we do the initial model check, we make sure the scope of work correctly capture on the submittals. So, we have another checklist to double check all this. And the common mistake that we saw is basically some of the models are not executable, and they submit all the the models, but doesn't have the floodway run. And we make those comments, and sometimes they mention about the encroachment in floodway, but they submit the proposed model identical to the existing. So of course, there's, geometries are exactly same. So, there's no elevation changes. So, a lot of times, these proposed geometries not captured in the models itself. That's common, mistake we saw. And sometimes they change the cross-section geometry outside of the project area. So, they propose encroachment inside of the floodway. So they show those changes, but, outside of that, proposed area, they slightly, change the geometry of the cross sections. So they achieve those no rise in that way. And that's, not a right thing to do. And a lot of times people claim no rise checking between existing and proposed condition only. and say, you know, like there's no elevation increase between those two, you know, like plans. So, you know, like this is no rise, but we also have to double check from the, you know, like effective model elevations all the way to the proposed, you know, condition models. And sometimes they introduce the flow changes in the models. So, you know, like anytime they change the hydrology, they need to submit the CLOMAR, like Amy mentioned before. And sometimes they change the stream channel. You know, like sometimes they have the stream restoration projects that change the, you know, like channel configurations. Then those need to be submitted as a CLOMAR as well, because that actually changed the, you know, profile baseline on the effective models. Next slide. So no-rise engineering model requirements. Amy mentioned this, you know, like pretty accurately before, but, you know, like the one thing that I want to mention is you need to use the entire effective models if the model is executable. Sometimes HEC2 model, they only have the output printout. In that case, is FEMA allowed to create the truncated model. So that's the only time you should use the truncated models. But when you use the truncated models, you should extend your model further downstream so your boundary condition doesn't affect the water surface elevation on the project site. So, you know, we normally recommend the requester to extend their model, you know, at least a mile or two downstream of the project site. And no-rise should obtain not just the project site, but entire length of the models. So, you know, a lot of times people claim no-rise because there's no elevation change on project site. But if you compare the elevation outside of those project site, there's still elevation changes, then, you know, that's not no-rise cases. And no discharge flow changes allow from the effective for the no-rise. And no profile baseline changes allowed for the no-rise cases. So all these changes require CLOMAR. Next slide. So we developed this no-rise review step decision tree. So basically you obtain the effective models from FEMA library, and then you run those models and create a duplicative effective models. And you compare that result against the effective. And if there's, you know, elevation changes, then you should stop the no-rise submittals, and you need to submit the CLOMAR to the FEMA. And, you know, next step is creating the corrective effective models if there's any non-man-made changes. And same thing, you need to compare that elevation against the effective model elevations. And if the elevations are different, and you truly believe you can achieve the no-rise using the correct effective models, then you can submit those correct effective models to FEMA as a LOMAR to fix the, you know, like the current effective model first and do the no-rise, or you can submit the entire package as a CLOMAR to the FEMA. And same thing for the existing condition model. Same thing. If you truly believe you can achieve the no-rise cases, then you can submit those existing model to FEMA as a LOMAR to update the FEMA map based on your, you know, like existing condition models and do the no-rise, or you can submit the CLOMAR case to FEMA. And lastly, the proposed condition models. So if there's elevation changes, basically that trigger the requester to submit the CLOMAR case to FEMA. Next slide. Amy, you wanna pick up the slide from here?
Can y'all hear me?
But basically, no-rise means no elevation increase, which is 0.00 feet across all the submittal models, like duplicate effective and corrective effective existing and proposed condition models, and no floodway increase.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah. I can hear you.
Okay. Okay, sorry. I was talking a minute ago, and yeah, I don't think you hear me. So this is what I was talking about earlier in the presentation when we talked about that there was a potential violation for a community. Tammy was working with the engineer because there was fill that was placed. It started off in the floodplain, but then somehow wound up in the floodway. And so I kind of deleted everything on here so you can't tell where it's at. But a lot of times we get arguments from engineers to say, I don't want to do it. But the engineer in this case didn't ask for any assistance or anything. And so you guys can see that this is 2 solid pages here of almost single spaced, all the information that was omitted. So sometimes we get a little bit of engineers that are frustrated with the amount of work that goes into doing an engineering analysis, but we're asking for the exact same information that FEMA requires if you're doing a letter of map revision. So the only thing I just wanted to say on this slide is you can see that this is a level of work that they need to, like they didn't do a topographic work map, and then some of the other not having tie-ins correctly and different things. And then the next page has even more information. So they have 12 various items to submit to FEMA within 90 days. It's a lot of work. And then also on the right-hand side, the smaller box, that they submitted a partial fee for review, but they were missing additional funding. So it's important when you're working with a project engineer that they submit the appropriate fee ahead of time to get this done. So again, you want to make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed when it comes to this. It's really important. And then we're just going to open it up for questions. We asked everybody just kind of write something in the chat box and we'll answer it as they come in. I appreciate Yang talking today and assisting the state of Tennessee with this process. I also want to give another shout out to my partner in crime, Tammy Hansen. She's on the call today. She's been a wealth of information, a pillar of support, just a wonderful person to work with overall. So she has also helped us do a decision tree, and this has worked based upon some of the requests we've had from the director and from my boss, Chris Johnson. I see you on there, Chris. Thank you for attending today. So we're just going to open it up for questions. We do have Michael Taylor from AECom on the webinar today too. He's an engineer as well. So if there's questions, if it's super technical, I'm going to let it go for Young and Mike. And if it's just something softballed from a non-engineer perspective, I'll answer. And we want to say thanks to everyone for taking time out today to be on the call. We know everybody's busy and this is super technical and complicated at times, but we just appreciate everyone. So we'll just start going with questions now. The slides will be available by email. I'll send out a PDF. We'll get a list of attendees. If you have a weird phone number and you don't have your name, just type in the chat box real quick if you have some weird phone number or something, because if we don't have your name, first name, last name, you may not get it. So you may have to just check on the Tennessee AFPM website for the presentation, but if you want it quick, just make sure. Thank you, Cindy. All right.
And real quick, as I mentioned earlier, this meeting was recorded. So if you want to use it as a resource, go ahead and email me. My email is .gregory@tn.gov, and I will send you a link to a Google Drive that you can use because of the file. I'm sure it'll be too big to actually email. Or if you have anybody else that you would want to have this information, you can send that link to.
Okay, Robbie Lee, I will send you, this is, your question is non-engineering related, so I will just email you afterwards, okay? So I will get you all the information you need on the Jones River watershed. Okay. I will send it to Rick. So does anybody have any engineering questions? I know we have some engineering friends on the webinar today. And also, Shanna, thank you for bringing that up. If you have coworkers that couldn't attend today, or maybe sometimes it makes the job difficult when there's a floodplain administrator and then other people try to jump in and maybe don't necessarily understand this topic. Make sure that you share it. Caring is sharing, so make sure that you share it with your coworkers, with your bosses, whomever has questions about this. It does come up every once in a while, but if you have an engineering department, make sure you share it with them. Stormwater management folks, public works. We do have an issue right now in the state where there's litigation currently, so we want to try to keep people out of trouble. So that's not fun when Tammy and I get those phone calls. We just want to make sure that we're not trying to hinder development. We're just trying to make sure that it's done in a way that doesn't harm anyone else and doesn't harm floodplain administrator, the developer, the engineer, and that we're being responsible with the choices and things that we're doing here currently. No questions? Come on, guys. We'll get you one, Ben. Not a problem. Mike, you want to say anything? Because no one heard your lovely voice today.
Sure. Just a couple of comments. You know, I think one of the things that Amy didn't talk about is just the direction of her program. And, you know, Yang and I have been doing work in Tennessee since 2004. And I think, you know, we went through this period of map modernization where we took all of your data, you know, all 95 counties and got it into digital format, but there wasn't a lot of new studies that were done. And if they were, it was on old topography. You know, I can remember going to meetings and people would say, well, this person's halfway up a hill and shown in the flood zone. And when you have, you know, 10 and 20-foot contours, that's the best you can do. So one of the things that FEMA and the state of Tennessee decided to do about 10 years ago, and Amy's been really involved in this, and Mark Vieira at Region 4, is, you know, let's get some really high quality data. And so the state of Tennessee embarked on a statewide, you know, LiDAR project so that there's high quality topo data wherever we're doing a study right now. And then, you know, wherever there's a risk map project or Corps of Engineers data, detailed studies, you know, we're actually doing new modeling, you know, detailed, limited detail, approximate, but all of it has a backed model being mapped on this LiDAR data. And so, and it's not just, you know, Metro Nashville, it's a lot of rural communities too. We're doing, you know, watersheds and projects all over the state. So the hope is that as you continue to get this data, you're going to at least recognize that it's very high quality. And so one of the things that Amy and Yang are trying to do is, you know, a model is only as good as actual conditions. So if your community is going to apply changes, you just want to make sure that you're continuing to, you know, keep the integrity of the model. Because like Amy said, what you don't want to do is harm one of your upstream or downstream neighbors. So, you know, you may live in a rural community, but if the community upstream of you is highly developed, you know, you may see increased flows. You know, or if someone puts in a culvert and it's undersized, the people that had no flooding conditions upstream are suddenly in a lot of trouble. And so, you know, you may get a lot of political pressure to say, boy, the engineers really don't want to do this. But you're going to also get a lot of political pressures if you approve something, a culvert goes in, it's undersized, and then people that have lived there for years are suddenly getting flooded once a year where they never, you know, saw flooding before. So just keep in mind that the state of Tennessee is doing a lot to make your maps better in addition to this program. And Amy, that's all I have to say.
All right, anybody else have any questions, comments, concerns? Okay. The LiDAR data, the state of Tennessee has a strategic technology solutions. They have a LiDAR website where you can download it. And what I'll do, Michael, is just send you, I'll make a note right now and send you the link so that you can download that. You know, you want to answer that question from Steve Casey?
I'm reading the question. Just 1 second. Yeah, of course. I mean, since you're only interested in the project site area, you know, like we're looking at those additional cross section as well. But effective models and corrective effective models is not going to have those, you know, like additional cross sections. Does that answer your questions?
Okay, so we have another question. Says, how often do letter map revisions get incorporated into firm map? I have a subdivision with a Lomar over 15 years old that constantly calls to ask why they're in a floodplain, and I have to try to explain the process with each new owner. If a community has development and they do have a letter map revision, then you would get issued a new flood insurance rate map, flood insurance profile. The thing, Angela, I would say is that flood insurance rate maps do not stay static. They do not stay the same. I try to tell folks that it's kind of like a waistline. If you eat fruits and vegetables and you exercise and you watch what you eat, you can kind of stay slim and trim. But if you eat junk and you don't exercise, it expands. And as development occurs upstream and downstream, a floodplain and floodway can expand and contrast. So it's never ever going to stay the same. The important thing to remember too is that if someone's going to be buying a house in a community, the realtor should be telling them, checking to see if it's in the floodplain. And then I know on what is that? Is it Zillow that they have information about whether a structure is in a floodplain? So a lot of times folks don't understand or know that they're in a floodplain until they're told they have to buy flood insurance, and then they freak out. So it's just one of those things. What I'll try to do is get some information just that you can kind of share with them if you keep getting a question like that. So, okay, Young, we got a question about, Steve has a follow-up question. He meant in terms of water surface elevation.
Yes, so I mean, your DEM, duplicate effective models, and corrective effective models normally don't have those additional cross sections. So you cannot really compare from that. So, you know, like when you add those additional cross section to your existing and proposed condition models, those two elevations shouldn't change, but you know, like you're just, you know, like anywhere else, like existing cross section from the DEM to CEM to existing and proposed condition, if they have the cross section, you know, like identical cross section all over, then yes, you need those elevations shouldn't change. So project side only, basically, you're comparing proposed condition existing condition model versus proposed condition, because duplicate effective model doesn't have those cross sections.
Amy, this is Mike. Do you want me to answer the Stones River question?
Go ahead, yeah. And club members away. Go ahead.
Okay, sure. So for those of you in the Stones watershed, as you know, we had scheduled your final meeting and some open houses right before the COVID-19 hit in the spring of this year. And so after that, FEMA kind of put all of the projects that were about ready to enter the appeal period on hold. We were hoping, you know, over the summer we were going to see a dip to where we could try to have some open house meetings. That didn't pan out, and as you all know, the situation's only gotten worse. So we are looking to see if we can have some virtual open houses, or working with FEMA and the state if we can plan some of those. But in the meantime, we are moving forward with getting data submitted to the Federal Register, so that will publish, and then, you know, hopefully in the spring of next year we'll begin the 90-day appeal period. But in the meantime, you know, we just don't think it's safe to have an in-person meeting, open houses, but we will look to see if there's some type of outreach we can do. But that's where the study's at. Not much past where it was before. We were hoping we would get some in-person meetings, but unfortunately with the COVID situation, we weren't able to do that.
I'll go ahead and send an email to everybody in Stones River just in case some folks weren't on the call today, just so that they know. Anybody else have any other questions, comments, concerns? Okay, well, I think we're gonna wrap it up then. Appreciate everyone coming today, attending today. If you haven't signed up, hurriedly go over to the TN AFPM website and register for the virtual conference tomorrow. We have a lot of great statewide speakers that are going to talk about different floodplain elements and projects and different things. So we'll be on a webinar all day tomorrow, just about. So thanks everyone, and if you need anything, holler. Have a happy holiday season. Thank you. Bye, Daniel.